Chapter 3, Income. Economic development entails many different sorts of outcomes. Income growth, poverty, inequality, human welfare. These outcomes are obviously interrelated. Understanding these interrelationships is a central theme in development economics. As we shall see, these economic outcomes can shape one another in complex and important ways. Before we learn how to study these interactions and outcomes, and before we consider ways to influence them with policies and projects, we need to know how to measure them. In this chapter, we focus on measuring income. That might sound boring and straightforward, but read on and you may be surprised by how interesting, challenging, and controversial income can be. It is often consequential as well, because a country's measured income level can determine whether it gets special privileges or preferential treatment in international organizations and negotiations. Essentials: gross domestic product and gross national product. Subsistence goods and shadow values, market failures, externalities in public goods, development classifications and categories, input-output analysis and income multipliers, purchasing power parity and price deflators, creating and using indexes. Measuring income. Income is a basic development indicator. Indeed, it provides the most obvious distinction between the rich and the poor. It is also an important input in the economic development process, since investments of all kinds in people, in society, innovation, in nature require resources. Poor countries have low income and therefore fewer resources available to accomplish their development goals. Before going any further, we should agree on how to measure income. The most basic measure of a country's income is its gross domestic product, GDP. This concept is based on a fundamental identity, i.e., relationship in economics. In all economic activities, total income must always equal total expenditures. Every dollar of sales by a shirt factory income either goes towards purchasing the inputs, including labor, used to produce the shirts, or gets paid out to the factory's owners as profit expenditures. Based on this identity, we can calculate a country's GDP in one of two ways. First, we can add up the value of all final goods and services produced within the country and then sold. By final, we mean goods and services that are not inputs into the production of some other good. For example, cotton is rarely a final good. It is an input in the production of cloth. Cloth, in turn, is an input in producing clothes. Clothes are almost always a final good. We buy and wear them rather than using them to produce something else. You can see the potential for double counting here. The price of a shirt includes the cost of the cotton fabric to the garment factory, as well as the cost of the cotton to the textile mill. If we added the value of the cotton, fabric, and shirt together to calculate GDP, we would significantly overstate the value of what was produced in the economy. We also want to be careful not to count the value of inputs produced in foreign countries. If the buttons on shirts sold in the United States were produced in Mexico, they were part of the GDP of Mexico, not the U.S. The U.S.-Mexico border really matters in this case because the gross domestic product is meant to capture the geography of the economic activity. In short, calculating national income is a lot harder than it sounds. After we determine which goods to include, we have to add them all together to get a measure of total production. We do this by putting a value on each of the goods. What value do we use for all of these final goods? Economists tend to trust markets to indicate what goods are worth, so not surprisingly, we use market prices. This gives us the gross domestic product at market prices. The second way to estimate the gross domestic product is to focus on inputs instead of final goods and then add up the cost of all factor inputs: capital, labor, land. Any economic activity takes immediate inputs, cotton, fabric, thread, buttons, and uses factors of production, labor, and capital to turn these inputs into a product.